Chapter 8: The Mongol Empire, the fastest rise and fastest capability collapse in history. The Mongol Empire offers one of the most dramatic demonstrations in world history of how rapidly an empire can rise when capability density is extraordinarily high, and how rapidly it can collapse when that capability cannot be scaled, institutionalized, or inherited. More than any other civilization, the Mongols showed the extremes of the complexity curve. Their ascent was meteoric, their system astonishingly effective, and their fall shockingly swift. In a single lifetime, they built the largest contiguous land empire in human history. In barely another lifetime, it fractured into independent khanates, each unable to maintain the cohesive machinery of the original system. The Mongols did not fall because of military defeat, technological inferiority, or economic stagnation. They fell because the empire they built required a level of human competence that could not be replicated by successive generations. Their core operating system, personal genius, elite cohesion, and razor-sharp discipline, was impossible to scale to an empire that stretched from Korea to Hungary. The result was the most spectacular mismatch between complexity and capability ever recorded. The Mongol rise began with a concentration of military and organizational talent that was unprecedented. Genghis Khan forged a unified military structure out of tribes previously locked in cycles of blood feud and fragmentation. His brilliance lay not only in strategy but in recognizing talent and reorganizing human capital with ruthless efficiency. The decimal military system, units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, created scalable command structures. Promotions were based on merit, not lineage, producing an elite officer corps. This system was reinforced by the Yasa, the legal code attributed to Genghis Khan. Though not preserved as a single document, it is referenced by Persian, Arab, and Chinese chroniclers and enforced strict discipline, merit-based advancement, collective responsibility, and absolute obedience. This was not tribal chaos. It was engineered capability concentration. The Mongols built a system explicitly designed to maximize human performance under extreme conditions. They maintained a courier network, the YAM, capable of transmitting information across thousands of kilometers and built intelligence networks that mapped enemy systems before invasion. Their armies were mobile, coordinated, and adaptive, operating with a precision that settled civilizations could not match. This early system worked because it rested on an elite nucleus of extraordinarily capable individuals whose upbringing, nomadic mobility, archery from childhood, clan warfare, produced warriors operating at peak human performance. Every Mongol was effectively a trained cavalry archer from youth. Officers were selected for competence, not birth. Campaigns were led by a small group of exceptional generals, Subutai, Jeeb, Joki, Chagatai, Ogidi, whose strategic intelligence rivaled history's greatest commanders. This density of elite skill allowed the Mongols to defeat far larger and more technologically advanced societies. They conquered China, Persia, Russia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe not through numbers or technology but through capability concentration. A stark demonstration of this dynamic appears in the sack of Baghdad, 1258. Hulagu Khan's forces destroyed the Abbasid capital, ending the caliphate. But Baghdad did not fall because Mongol capability was superhuman. It fell because the Abbasid system had already hollowed out. Political fragmentation, fiscal decay, military weakness, and administrative paralysis preceded the invasion. The Mongols did not defeat a strong empire. They exposed a weak one. Conquest succeeded because the target system had already failed. Embedded in Mongol success, however, was the seed of collapse. The empire was not built on institutions that could survive the loss of its founding generation. It depended on personal relationships, exceptional individuals, and elite cohesion. These elements do not scale. Once the Mongols transitioned from conquest to governance, complexity exploded. Administering conquered territories required literate bureaucrats, tax collectors, engineers, diplomats, and judges, roles the nomadic system had not produced at scale. To compensate, the Mongols relied on Persians, Chinese, Uyghurs, and Arabs to run administration. A two-tier system emerged, Mongol military aristocrats ruling sophisticated bureaucracies staffed by non-Mongols. Initially this worked because the ruling elite remained cohesive and capable. But as generations passed, capability density declined while complexity continued rising. This is the classic capability-complexity spiral. The Mongols needed to institutionalize excellence but lacked schools, civil services, or professional bureaucracies to reproduce it. Leadership became hereditary. Khans were chosen through political compromise, not merit. Factionalism spread. The skills that united the tribes under Genghis Khan vanished within 2 generations. Fragmentation after Ogdi's death reveals this clearly. Kurultais required consensus among elite families whose interests diverged as complexity grew. Without a unified center capable of enforcing standards, regional khanates drifted toward autonomy. The Ilkhanate, Golden Horde, Chagatai Khanate, and Yuan dynasty developed divergent systems. Expertise fragmented. The empire that required unified elite capability became a patchwork of courts unable to match original standards. The Yuan dynasty in China exposes the mismatch most clearly. China was the most complex bureaucracy in the world. Kublai Khan employed Chinese officials, but Mongols retained political dominance. Authority lacked competence. Competence lacked authority. Administration stalled. Corruption spread. The Mongol aristocracy assimilated into sedentary court life, losing martial culture. Military standards declined. Logistics decayed. When rebellions rose, the Yuan lacked the capability to respond. They inherited China's complexity without the capacity to operate it. The Golden Horde followed a similar trajectory. Initially dominant, it grew dependent on local elites, tax farming, and shifting alliances. The ruling class assimilated into Turkic Islamic culture. As assimilation progressed, the cultural foundations that produced elite cavalry dissolved. By the time Muscovy asserted independence, the horde lacked the discipline to suppress it. The empire became a hollow shell, large, weak, dysfunctional. The Ilkhanate in Persia demonstrates the economic dimension. Heavy taxation funded court and military expenditure, but administrators lacked the finesse to manage Persia's complex agrarian systems. Irrigation was mismanaged. Taxation became erratic. Output fell. The state responded with heavier coercion, accelerating decline. This is structural. When capability falls, states substitute force for competence. Across all successor states, the same pattern appears. The original empire was built on extreme elite capability. Complexity rose. Capability did not. Successive generations inherited power without inherited skill. The Mongols lacked institutional mechanisms to reproduce excellence. Meritocracy gave way to heredity. Once privilege replaced performance, standards declined. Once standards declined, lesser administrators and soldiers were accepted. Once lesser standards were accepted, the system became harder to operate. Once the system became harder to operate, fragmentation followed. By the late 14th century, the Mongol world existed only as scattered khanates with shrinking influence. None retained the administrative coherence or military superiority of the original empire. The most spectacular military machine in history produced an empire that lasted barely a century at full strength. This was not cultural failure. It was structural physics. Brilliance can build an empire. Only institutionalized competence can sustain one. The lesson is universal. In the next chapter, we turn to the Ottoman Empire, where this dynamic unfolds slowly over 6 centuries, an empire whose decline was not explosive but cumulative, inevitable once it crossed the capability, complexity threshold.